Mr. President, are we in a quorum call?
We are not.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, this is Holly Durbin from Shenandoah, Iowa. Holly was someone who loved animals and loved nature. She was a people person. The thing that she loved most in the world was her family. But tragically, Holly took her last breath on the morning of July 18th, 2009. Brian Davis murdered her in a small farmhouse just south of Shenandoah. Holly is one of the hundreds of women murdered annually by a current or former intimate partner. Nearly 3 women a day. Americans are being devastated by a wave of violent crime. Night after night, folks turn on their local news and hear of yet another tragic story of murder, of rape, violent crimes of all natures that are ravaging their community. In October, the U.S. recorded its highest spike in homicides in modern history. Last year, the murder rate in this country rose by 30%. These murders are not being committed by law-abiding citizens. They are being committed by extremely dangerous and violent crimes, like Brian Davis. The reality is victims like Holly Durbin and violent criminals like Brian Davis have been locked in homes together for nearly 2 years during this pandemic. Violent convicted criminals like Brian Davis, who murdered Holly, his fiancée, should not have access to firearms. Law-abiding Americans need the ability to protect themselves from violent criminals like Brian Davis. Iowans are common sense. We're pragmatic. We take our Second Amendment rights incredibly serious. We value the safety of our communities, and we think it's right to punish violent criminals when they break the law and are convicted. This isn't some crazy idea. Under current federal law, which has been on the books for decades, and in state codes all across the country, there are violent crimes that results in consequences like the inability to possess a firearm. For example, someone convicted of a felony forfeits many of their Felons can't be on a jury. They can't work for the federal government or serve in the military. Felons, like murderers and drug kingpins, lose these rights when they commit and are convicted of their crimes. A fugitive from justice is not permitted to have a firearm. Same for those who are in this country illegally. Under current law, individuals who have been convicted of a misdemeanor domestic violent crime are also on this list. As of today, if 2 individuals are married, the convicted abuser is held accountable, and that makes sense. But if they are not married, the convicted violent abuser is not held accountable. Mr. President, I believe we need to get tough on crime. And I believe law-abiding gun owners in this country agree with me. Brian Davis, a violent, convicted criminal, is not law-abiding. I want to be crystal clear about a few things. One, what we are talking about here depends on a conviction of domestic violence. That's a guilty verdict after a just trial, an adjudicated fairly trial. Due process is completely intact, fully present, and I will not be compromised on that. I can promise you. Two, domestic violence does not mean emotional distress. Domestic violence does not mean a verbal argument. Domestic violence means a violent crime. Three, not a single innocent or law-abiding gun owner will or should be impacted. Today, there are women trapped in relationships with violent criminals. Our daughters and mothers, our friends, and our neighbors. Convicted violent criminals have proven themselves to be unfit to fully participate in our society. We can't choose to just protect women with a ring on their finger from violent abusers. We must hold violent criminals accountable. Let's protect our daughters and punish the criminals. Mr. President, speaking from personal experience, domestic violence is a crime worth being tough on. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.